We have some really interesting news today, and that is that OpenAI, they didn't really make a big announcement about this, but they've actually changed their policy, some people have found, to allow military applications. Now, I think this is going to have a lot of different applications in the AI space. This is very interesting. This kind of follows a trend where a number of years ago, perhaps when this policy was created by OpenAI, there was kind of this negative stigma of working with the military, working with the government. And this seems to be shifting in businesses' minds and also in employees' minds. So essentially, I think a lot of this big trend happened with Google. They had a lot of employees quit when Google said they were going to work with the military. They had petitions, and I think Google ultimately pulled out and said they won't do any work with the U.S. military. This move was criticized by some founders, such as Palmer Luckey from Anduril, who formerly sold Oculus to Facebook. He, is very public saying, you should, if you live in a free democracy, you should create, you should work with the government to help have military tools to maintain your freedom and democracy from other countries whose tech companies will be working with them. And his case is like, if all the Chinese tech companies are making Chinese weapons, wouldn't you want to support a free democracy and support the government? So that's kind of his thing. And he started Anduril, which is, of course, a big AI and defense company and drone kind of defense company, and doing a bunch of high-tech military defense tools. So I'm not saying which side I agree with necessarily, but these are the kind of the arguments that a lot of people are talking about in this space. So today on the podcast, I want to talk about where OpenAI is at with this because they've made some important changes. So let's get into the podcast. Before we do that, I want to say today's episode is sponsored by AI Box, my very own AI app builder and marketplace. If you're interested in building really robust workflows, being able to leverage all of the different AI tools out there to create some really powerful tools, get on the waitlist for AI Box at aibox.ai. And if you're interested in investing in this platform, we just crossed $300,000 raised, and you can go to republic.com/AI-box. Leave a link in the show notes to become an investor.
We gon' bring it to you just like that. Welcome everyone to the future. It's AI Chat, bringing you the interviews and giving you info to be in the know from tech company CEOs of. Rock with us, bet you gon' come back. I'm just saying the facts. This is AI Chat. Let's go.
So this whole news about OpenAI essentially, changing their policy to allow military applications, this was all discovered recently by a journalist. And what we're seeing right now is that OpenAI has essentially revised its usage policy, which previously it prohibited military applications of its technology, but they've actually removed that from it. So the specific prohibition on the use of OpenAI's products, it used to say like it was prohibited for, quote, military and warfare. This has been removed. So I think this is actually pretty interesting. This is what they used to say. They used to have a section in their policy that said, we don't allow the use of our models for the following. They had illegal activities, they had hate and harassment, they had child abuse, they had malware generation. Like all of that stuff is obviously should be in place. They also have ones that says activities that has a high risk of physical harm, including weapons development, military and warfare, management or operation of critical infrastructure and energy, transportation and water, content that promotes, encourages, or depicts self-harm. So this is interesting. A couple things I think is interesting there is obviously the self-harm stuff, get rid of that. Then of course there's weapons development and military warfare. I think it's interesting these are removed. Obviously you could do this kind of stuff with an open source platform like Mistral if you really wanted to get an AI to help you with that. So I don't think anyone's losing out if they really needed it for their job, and that's just where they worked. I do think it's kind of interesting that they call out management or operation of critical infrastructure in energy, transportation, and water. They specifically didn't want or didn't have that there. So very, very interesting. So they have now changed that. They've changed their whole policy, and now the policy simply reads, they've pulled that out completely. And all that they say is, to maximize innovation and creativity, we believe that you should have the flexibility to use our services as you see fit, so long as you comply with the laws and don't harm yourself or others. When using ChatGPT and OpenAI, these rules apply. Number one, comply with applicable laws. And then they kind of go into that, which covered some of the other stuff. Then they say, don't use our services to harm yourself or others. For example, don't use our service to promote self-harm, develop or use weapons. So they still have the weapons element there. injure, but I think that also is like, how do I make a bomb, right? So like that would be against their terms of service. Injure others or destroy property, which, I mean, the military is technically injuring people, but maybe like using it in the military where it's like helping the military, do parts of their tasks that aren't specifically in regards to weapons or injuring people, or destroy property or engage in unauthorized activities that violate the security of any service or system. So that's all it says now. No mention of military. You can control F or Command F on the page. You will not see military mentioned anywhere. And I think that this is actually really interesting because right now, obviously, we have some other big applications coming out. You have companies like Palantir that have really impressive AI platforms, which essentially it helps military plan logistical moves. It's like you have 10 aircrafts over here, aircraft carriers over here. You have like 5 military bases here. It's got a panel with a map and shows you where all your troops are. And you're like, if I need to get troops from point A to point B and there's, enemy in these 5 locations, like what's the best way to do that so no one gets hurt? And it will come up with like your route and give you some like guides and stuff. So Palantir is some interesting technology like that. And I'm wondering if OpenAI is trying to get in on that same technology, or if they're just trying to be like less, like they're trying to not exclude people that might want those types of capabilities, military service people, etc. Right? So I think this is pretty interesting. OpenAI, they have the whole policy. They've changed the wording. What I will say is this isn't like uncommon to change the wording of your policies. A lot of tech companies do this, and they recently came out with their GPT store. So like with that, I believe that they evidently need a lot of they probably have a lot of different terms of service things that had to be changed anyways for that. What I will say is OpenAI recently announced some user customizable GPTs and a new monetization policy as well. So with that GPT store, they have a new kind of monetization policy that also had to be added in. So I think this is, not seen as a mere clarification, but probably a significant shift. I'd be interested if this is kind of like a cultural shift within the company or just really where the direction is going. So the current and old usage policy clearly, outlined no military, doesn't say that anymore. So this is now, I think, subject to some interpretation, right? Like we mentioned when I was reading it, like I mentioned, it literally says like you can't use it for things that could harm people. So people are interpreting, does the military harm people? Does it protect people? And of course, depending on what side of the gun you're on, I'm sure your opinion would be different. But in any case, I think the term military is now out of it. So OpenAI's representative Nico Felix noted a continuing prohibition on developing and using AI weapons. We saw this in the policy. This makes sense. And the military currently engages in activities beyond warfare. Of course, we know this, right? Like they're doing research and infrastructure, and all of that isn't covered by the weapons ban necessarily. So maybe it makes sense to remove the whole military, if it's really their idea not to have this help develop weapons. Removing the military doesn't mean that all of a sudden, it could be used for weapons development or lethal activities. It could be used by the military to help with other things like research, etc. So I think in that sense, it makes sense. And it's kind of, it seems like the military is a very large element of any country. Millions of people in the United States work in the military, and to have some sort of like ban on them, any of their service people being able to use ChatGPT for any of their jobs that might have nothing to do with, conflicts, etc., doesn't necessarily make sense in my opinion. So that might make more sense. So OpenAI's GPT platform may be used for a lot of different non-combative military applications like infrastructure, documentation, etc., etc. Companies often, I think, face dilemmas regarding the relationships with governments and military funding. Like I mentioned earlier, there's the whole Google debacle. And then there's companies like Anduril who have kind of embraced working with the government and the military in that regard and are building weapons systems, et cetera, for them. So I think this is all very interesting. OpenAI recently was asked to confirm or deny their openness to military use with any, because of this. And I don't think we've got an update on that, but I think it's probably pretty evident and pretty clear right now what's going on there. So I think this is a very interesting development because OpenAI really does kind of set the stage, and it's kind of seen as the market maker. So if OpenAI is changing the way that their policy works, I think we can expect to see other players that might have had like a more hardline approach maybe soften up and say like, hey, look, like not everyone in the military is working on weapon systems. You can let them, use it for infrastructure and research and other things. And maybe we get to a point where some people are going to have the opinion saying, we should allow the military to use these to develop weapon systems or to develop other things that are there to protect us. So like there's also that side of the argument as well. And I think all sides are valid. This is an interesting discussion. And definitely as we continue to see how this rolls out, I'll keep you updated. Thank you for listening to the AI Chat Podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, I'd appreciate it if you rate me wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're looking for an innovative group of AI enthusiasts, make sure you check out our Discord channel and also our Facebook community. It's obviously a lot more interactive than a podcast where we can actually share software tools, prompts that we're using in everyday AI. I'll leave a link for those in the description below.